Hey everyone, this is the fourth episode of 18%, where we talk about mental health, people that are living with it or people that have been affected by it. And this is our fourth episode, and we have Fred, who is the father of Lewis, who passed away due to mental health issues. And he was the inspiration to start this whole series. And he was the inspiration to start the community. He's been a lending hand and a wonderful supporter. And Zach and I are grateful that we have Fred, and that you could turn such a situation into something somewhat positive and get people to start talking about it to end the stigma. And Fred's going to talk about his story and the story about Lewis, and we'll take it from there. So first off, can you just share the story for the people that don't know about Lewis, a little bit about him, the situation that happened, and so on?
Sure. First of all, I'm pleased to be able to chat with you today, David, and all the stories that you present on 18% are important for everyone to hear. Lewis, I'll go way back. Lewis was born in 1995. We lived in Miami, Florida for his first 8 years. During his first 8 years of life, he was a normal, happy, bright, active, made friends easily kind of kid. Then I guess 2003, when he was about 8, we moved to Northern California. And again, he was able to make friends starting there in the 3rd grade easily. He was active in youth sports. Nothing unusual at all. He was an excellent student. In fact, at 6th grade graduation from elementary school, he, along with 2 other kids, received sort of the highest honor that you can get in an elementary school. And then also in middle school, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, an honor student, an excellent soccer forward. As he went into high school, again, 9th grade, he had a strong first year of high school. For him, the wheels came off the cart a little bit in his sophomore year. He started making some unusual decisions. Some friends changed, and things were a little different. His group of friends became different. If I can use the term, he was hanging with a little bit more, a group of sort of outsiders a little bit more. He became less interested at that point in, no longer played soccer. So we knew something was wrong, although, like I say, in retrospect, I don't know that this was any huge first indication. And went up to the mountains and rented a house and spent time really just focusing on Lewis. The net of this story at this point anyway is he got it. Once again, he sort of was able to sort of transition back to sort of the person that he was before this aberrant sophomore year in high school. He got it to the extent that in his final 2 years of high school, he was an unbelievable student, taking rigorous classes, scoring as high as one can score on AP Physics, on AP Calculus. He became more involved in music, particularly choral music. He smiled, even though he was only on the track and cross-country teams in his final year of high school. So by the time he finished high school, he was seriously banging on all 8s with one exception. We did notice, and he noticed, and we talked extensively about his inability to feel comfortable socially, even with old friends, friends he's had since third grade, people that he's known for years. Somehow during his level, his social skills and his comfort level in social situations as it relates to not just his friends, but trying to sort of relate to, in his case, girls and understand how he fits in socially was really very difficult for him. We got him some counseling, but nonetheless, he seemed to struggle. I would say at this point in retrospect, maybe that was a red flag, but it was difficult to say. Certainly nothing that at that point indicated to us that mental illness.
So if you didn't think if you didn't
He,
think it was
yeah,
mental illness, what did you think was going on?
that's a good question. We thought it was just some sort of awkward socialization, some insecurity that he may have felt in social situations, because there's a very secure kid in many other situations. Um, there may have been overtones of depression, but I wouldn't characterize him as a depressed young adolescent. And as I say, we did try to intervene with counseling, which he responded to, but didn't really have sort of a lasting impact. The counseling was sort of had a more of a transient kind of impact. What I'm characterizing, though, is not someone who was struggling on a day-to-day basis, but he had lost some of the happiness that we saw in him as a younger child. His inability to function, I guess, normally in, as I say, these social situations. But at the same time, by the time he graduated from high school, he was he won department awards in social science, won department awards in math. He made a big contribution to the madrigals choral group at his high school in Fair Oaks, California. And he was not clearly someone who we perceived to be at risk. After high school, he made a trip to Germany, which was a great experience for him. We went with his mother and his grandfather and understood a little bit more about his family. His grandmother was from Germany. He came back from Germany and decided that rather than going to college, he was a very, very good snowboarder. So he did that. And at the conclusion of that ski season, came back and seemed to be in a reasonably good space for a while. And then we started noticing that he was spending, a tremendous amount of time alone, kind of writing, outlines regarding various aspects of his life and plans for his life, and I think using some of the study skills that he gained in high school to review his situation in life at that point. He at that point also began to become redundant and repeat the same behaviors over and over again, starting over only to again repeats to outlines, plans, extensive and very specific writing and But it was sort of, Lewis, what's going on here? And it was difficult to understand. He had made he made a good friend while working in a ski resort. She was from Peru, and he decided, and we supported, that he make a trip to Peru. It was a good experience for him. It wasn't something that we perceived to be dangerous. So in the summer of, I guess now we're in 2014, he went to Peru for a period of time. Yeah, I think he enjoyed himself. I think it was an important trip for him because it allowed him to experience a kind of important relationship, but also see another country and be independent. He came back from Peru in the summer of 2014, and that's when it was very clear that Lewis was not well. He, starting late in the summer of 2014, began a period of sort of bipolar activity. He would not sleep the way he should have been able to sleep. He was always engaged in something that was meaningful to him, but was sort of unclear as to why he was listening to something or writing something or trying to understand something that was not necessarily spot on to his day-to-day life. He was very, very sort of not just interested, but sort of infatuated with new religions, with sort of he also tried to sort of reteach himself math and physics and things that he had sort of understood before, but now he was trying to sort of take it to a new level without benefit of a classroom or teachers, figuring he could do it all on his own. So by the time October of 2014 came around, that was the point at which he launched into his first full-blown psychotic event. And he was hearing voices. He was defiant when some of his behaviors and thought processes were pointed out to him. And finally, on one day in October of 2014, he became unmanageable after having not slept for a long period of time, working on whatever he deemed to be important at that time. So he was. We were forced into a situation where we had to call 911. The sheriffs showed up. Fortunately, the sheriffs understood that he was mentally ill, that he was in a psychotic state, and it was not a pleasant experience to see him being taken away to the emergency room. But that's what happened. He wound up in the emergency room for the first of 4 hospitalizations over a period of the next 2 years. So from there, he, from the emergency room, wound up admitted to a psychiatric facility where he stayed. When we would visit him, he was a different person. he was responding to a different reality. He was making gestures. He was not recognizing us as his parents. He was very ill. He wound up, on medication, which helped, and was ultimately released to us after, as I say, several weeks in the psychiatric facility. When he got home, we identified a program associated with the University of California, Davis, called the EDAPT program. EDAPT is an acronym for Early Diagnosis and Preventative Treatment, and it's a program that is specifically aimed at adolescents who are emerging as mentally ill, having had no more than one psychotic event. We thought it was a good program for him, but he didn't see it in quite the same terms. He was distrustful. He was also now building certain attitudes about the psychiatric and psychological communities as agents for the big pharma, which was the evil empire. But oddly enough, the medications did help calm him down. He was now able to sort of recognize us and communicate with us, although he was flat affect. The medications used to treat these folks that are mentally ill, and in Lewis's case, gravely ill, have profound side effects. And he was aware of those and just didn't want any part of it. At a certain point during a visit with a psychiatrist at the EDAPT program, the psychiatrist deemed him psychotic on the spot and immediately admitted him to another psychiatric facility. This was something that I can't tell you, David, how disturbing that was, not just to us to see this happen to his son, but he was cold cocked. It came out of the blue to him. He goes in for a normal psychiatric visit and comes burns dead. He admitted once again to a psychiatric hospital. Once again, he was there. And by the way, these psychiatric hospitals, understandably, are very secure places, but it's a rather disturbing experience to visit them as a parent. They're very limited and defined visiting hours, and it's also difficult because at this point, Lewis was, deemed to be an adult, and if he didn't consent to access to information, if he didn't consent, his parents really needed to be connected to, it's a huge problem. Fortunately, he consented most of the time, but I can also see this as a problem for other families that are in a similar situation. Again, he's at the psychiatric facility for a period of time. He receives medication. He gets good psychiatric care there, but he is discharged once again to us. And now we are into a pattern. This pattern is, on the medication, soon to be off the medication, into a period of psychosis, back to the hospital, on the medication, off the medication, and the pattern repeated itself several more times. Finally, During one hospitalization, he was there for actually for quite a long time, a period of months. He was released, and he seemed to, this is his last hospitalization, he seemed to be a little bit more understanding about the necessity of the medication. He seemed also to be a little bit more insightful about his condition. And this is another big point I would make is he, not atypically for kids with his specific condition, which was schizoaffective disorder, had really no insight. He had a modicum of understanding that he might be ill at times, not always, but really had no insight with respect to his own condition and the need for continuing therapy, both in terms of pharmaceuticals, but also in terms of psychiatric and psychological counseling. Nonetheless, after this last hospitalization, he for actually quite a long while, we had to check him. Was he cheeking the medication? Was he actually we had to stand there and watch him take it to discontinue medication and therapy in early 2017. I think it was February of 2017, might have been March, but early 2017. We made a lovely trip to Yosemite in April of 2017, and by the end of May and the very early part of June of 2017, he was clearly in the throes of psychosis once again. And my wife and I were very close to trying to get him back into a psychiatric facility, and he wasn't aware of that per se, but it was. I should also point out, digress just a little. We had also moved. Our family had moved from the home where we lived for a long time to our current location, which is sort of rural. It was a planned move. It's a lovely place to live, but the specific area poses some dangers for people that don't understand those dangers. So, in the throes of a psychotic event on June 3rd of 2017, Lewis left. We thought he was out for a walk. We didn't think there was much to it. We were, as I say, contemplating calling the sheriffs to see if we could get him admitted on a 3-day hold and then admitted to a psychiatric facility. There is also a big problem, David, with respect to the position that law enforcement is put in when it comes to mental health issues. It wasn't really clear to us if we would have been able to do that. So during this period, he took a walk, as I say, although he didn't come back. He was out overnight. We were freaking out, concerned. After about, 5 hours of him being missing, we called in missing persons to the El Dorado County Sheriffs. And they tried some, they attempted to help us understand what might have happened to him. We made it very clear to him that he was mentally ill and that he was in the throes of psychosis, which quite truthfully sort of got in the way of a very quick response and active search. And as it turns out, it would have been a moot point anyway, because what we now know is the river was 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 the conditions in the river were unusual because the winter of 2017 in Northern California was one of the biggest snowfalls in history. Were dangerous. Although the point at which he entered the river uh, was not particularly dangerous, but as he went further downriver, and he did not know, nor did we know, quite truthfully. We didn't have a lot of experience with that particular part of the river. Became exceedingly dangerous, and on June 4th, it's very clear to us. On June 4th, Lewis drowned accidentally in the river. He was seen several times on the morning of June 4th, and we went out looking for him. In fact, one of the, it seemed like because of his mental illness that the sheriff's department was only able to provide a limited amount of support.
And did they consider this suicide?
No, and it's very clear to us it wasn't suicide. Oddly enough, well, I shouldn't say oddly enough. Throughout the course of his illness, suicidal tendencies. In fact, it's very clear to me on that particular day when he entered the river, June 4th, 2017, he was probably a very happy kid. He was free. He was out in nature. He was communicating with those things that he thought were important. He was engaged in some odd behaviors, so we know that to be true. And some of his behaviors were a little disturbing to some people, so he was sort of encouraged to move along. And the further he went down the river, he was seen sitting on a rock, seemingly calm, and as I say, not too much further down the river, it became dangerous, very dangerous set of currents, rapids, and he got caught up in moving water that just washed him away. El Dorado County Search and Rescue did respond about a week later and organized a shore search on both sides of the river, which was negative. But they did bring out cadaver dogs, and the cadaver dog did light up in one particular spot. And in fact, while it was too dangerous to put divers in the water at that point, they were able to retrieve a sweatshirt that we knew he was wearing. So at that point, it was very clear that, it was from that point on a recovery issue. And given the state of the river, given the state of the flows out of the Sierras, we weren't able to recover his remains until nearly 4 months later. I'm sure I'm missing some important details. I'm sure you'll ask me more questions, but that's the overview of how Lewis was as a kid and how he became ill and how he lost his life.
It's just a very powerful story. What was your recovery process like, or your family's recovery process like?
Well, I don't know that. I think that's still in process. I mean, the fact of all of this, at least in terms of losing Lewis, has all occurred within the last year. June 4th is still several months away. I think as parents, my wife and I have gone through Could we have done more? I think we've asked that question many times. And the
Yeah, but
answer
you
to
also,
that
I
is,
mean, also the answer to that is that that's something that you're totally unprepared for, and you're not given an instructions book and saying, "Oh, this is what you're supposed to do in this situation." You're kind of relying on other people's resources, you know.
yeah, and in our good sense, I have, a little bit of medical background. My wife is a hospice case manager, retired now. Background. We did our own research throughout his illness. We were searching for what is the right medication, what are the side effects of the medication, what are the right programs, what can we do to help Lewis, most importantly, understand that he was ill and just like any other illness needed therapy and treatment. Trying to help him understand the nature of his illness and the necessity for ongoing treatment and therapy. So, to your question, how did we respond? We asked, could we have done more? I don't know that the answer is clearly yes. I think the other impact on us had a high intellect who had a strong kind of work ethic with kind of very well-defined goals, and to see that kind of dissolve into another kind of life that he may or may not have had. You know, we also asked the question quite candidly, what, had he not drowned in the river, what was his life going to be like? I mean, would there ever come a time where he might understand something about his condition, salute the therapy, and make some kind of reasonable life for himself? And, we're a little older too, to be to fill in some other blanks. I'm 66. My wife is 63. Lewis came along when we're both. I was in my. Well, we're both in our 40s, and we. It was going to mean a sort of a profound change to how we envisioned our later years too. And let me make this clear: we were prepared for that. We recognized that. We understood that. Okay. So, the question is, what kind of life would Lewis have had? And I don't know. And so we ponder that. And then of course, there are the triggers. There are, sort of the particular music, or there are particular days. For example, the day after tomorrow, Lewis would have been 23 years old. It's going to be a difficult day, but we're healthy. But it's not without a fair amount of second guessing and pain along the way.
And what type of advice would you offer to parents who are currently struggling with something that maybe Lewis was going through, or something similar?
One, I think you have to get good advice. I think you have to really educate yourself about the nature of the particular condition. Um, there's all kinds of information, some credible, but some not so credible, but a tremendous amount of credible information available. Two, I think the most important thing is to do whatever is possible to um, help the afflicted, if I can use that word, or affected person to understand that his or her condition is an illness, excuse me, treatment, therapy on an ongoing basis. That's a very difficult proposition. What I have heard along the line during the course of Lewis's illness is that is probably the biggest, or one of the biggest issues faced by a lot of folks that are mentally ill, and that is the fact that they just don't understand it, they don't believe it. The medications to some extent work, and because the medications work, the person figures, guess what? I'm better again now. I don't need that stuff. So that's and that's a very difficult proposition, as I say, but that's exceedingly important to sort of recognize the fact that one is ill, and recognize that because one is ill, one needs to be compliant with the therapeutic program. I think the third thing is to sort of be honest with one's child who is mentally ill. And when I say be honest, I don't mean remind that person all the time that, hey, you're mentally ill, but at the same time, talk very openly, candidly, sensitively about the illness, the how the illness manifests, and again, with the hope that those kinds of conversations will resonate such that there is some higher level of understanding that, in fact, the illness does exist. Beyond that, you know, I think, and I don't know to what extent it has a benefit, but we tried to stimulate Lewis in ways that would sort of change his mood or make him happy. We took trips to the Grand Canyon. We took trips with him. This is while he was ill. To the Grand Canyon. We took trips to Olympic National Park. We loved going to Yosemite with him. My wife was often out searching out waterfalls and hikes, and some days were lovely for him and some days were not. But those days that are lovely are worth all the days that are not quite so lovely.
Exactly.
So I don't know, David. If I could crack this code, you know, I'd do it in a heartbeat, and you know, we would all do something very valuable for the mentally ill population. But that's what I got.
Thank you so much, Fred, for coming on the show and sharing your story. It's inspired us to create 18%, and I'm sure this video will inspire others. And thank you very much.